This is Tom Fox with an incredibly bittersweet special episode of the Hill Country Podcast. As many of you know, I live in the Texas Hill Country and in Kerr County. So the events of this weekend directly impacted myself and my family. I don't live on the river, so I didn't have to be a part of the devastation there. But I did lose friends who lived on that river. And one of those was a woman named Jane Ragsdale. Jane Ragsdale had dedicated herself to serving and helping others, both through her church and through her work as the owner of the camp Heart of the Hills, which was located on the Guadalupe River. Jane is the daughter of Kathy and Cy Ragsdale, who purchased Camp Stewart, the boys' camp on the North Fork of the Guadalupe River in the mid-'60s and ran it up until Cy's passing and Kathy retiring and her son Jeepers stepping in to run Camp Stewart. So camping and the camping experiences in the DNA of the Ragsdale family, and Jane certainly followed that. This is the interview I did with her earlier, pre-pandemic. I wanted to replay it as a tribute to Jane Ragsdale, and indeed all of those who lost their lives, the devastation and destruction of their property, and have been impacted by this catastrophic flood in Kerr County, Texas. In both the show notes and at the end of the episode, in the outro, I'm going to ask you to please consider a donation to the Hill Country Flood Relief Fund, which has been set up by the Kerrville Chamber of Commerce to help all of those who are in need. And now, my interview with Jane Ragsdale. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today, I'm thrilled to have with me Jane Ragsdale. Jane, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Happy to be with you, Tom.
Could you tell us your day job?
My day job is also often my night job. It's director at Heart of the Hills Camp for Girls.
How long have you had that job?
I've been director since 1988. Actually, I got the official designation in the fall of 87, after that summer of 87. Before that, I was program director for 12 years. And before that, I was a camper and a junior counselor for 5 years.
Would it be fair to say camping is in your blood?
It would be absolutely true.
And why would that be true?
Well, I started going to camp in 1966, but it was that same summer that my parents bought Camp Stewart for boys. And so I grew up at Stewart, and I thought when I was a little girl that I would grow up to run Camp Stewart. And when I mentioned it to my parents, I don't know why I thought they had any say-so in it, but they informed me that I was a girl and girls don't run boys' camps. And so I continued going to camp, never gave it up. But when I was 19, we had the opportunity to buy Heart of the Hills. And so I had been a camper and counselor there. And we bought the Heart. My brothers and sister and I each put in enough money to own 10% at that point in time. And Mom and Dad together had 10%. So that totals 50. And then we brought in partners to be the directors until I was old enough to take over.
As much as I'd like to explore your camp experience with you, that's not the purpose of this podcast,
okay.
Though. Maybe we can do that another time. But I have heard you talk about your mission work.
Yes.
And I wanted to visit with you about your mission work. Many people in this part of the country, and indeed everywhere I've ever lived, have done mission work. But tell us about your mission work, how you got started, and why you're so passionate about it.
Okay, this sort of ties in with being a 19-year-old, owner of a camp, and I asked my parents, now what do I major in, to be able to run camp? And they said, well, you really can't bank on that. You have to plan an alternate career for yourself. And so I majored in journalism and Spanish. I got a degree in each field with the idea that I could be a foreign correspondent. And actually for 3 years then I worked on a newspaper and then would come back and work at camp, worked on a newspaper, came back to work at camp, so forth. And then I started working at camp year-round. But one of those years I lived in the off-season in Guatemala City, where I worked for a small English language newspaper that came out once a week. And I was hoping to practice my Spanish quite a bit. I found out the level of education in Guatemala is fairly poor, and that a lot of Guatemalans themselves speak other Mayan dialects as their primary language, and then Spanish is a second language to them. And so in some cases, the locals spoke worse Spanish than I did, which is pretty bad at the time. Anyway, I traveled quite a bit throughout the country of Guatemala, and I just fell in love with the culture and the beauty of the area and the kindness of the people. And I was also deeply affected by how meager their lives were. And when I moved to Guatemala, I took 5 dresses, one for each work day, and I thought that was really, really living slim, and realized that my coworkers who were Guatemalan came to work every day in the exact same clothes. They would go home and wash their outfit and get it all, wrinkles out and looking spiffy, and they'd show up in that very same outfit the next day at work. And, they were like supposedly middle-class people. And right outside the window of the house I lived in with a bunch of American school teachers, you could see a little cardboard hovel where someone lived, and would go, every day with their little machete and ask people, can I trim your lawn? Can I can I do any jobs for you? And they would just literally day by day eke out a living. And I was really stricken by this. Very, very poorest people didn't have shoes. They had thick calluses on their feet, and, and they carry heavy loads and, walk around everywhere they go, up and down volcanoes, big, tall, steep hills. And I don't know, I just felt like my heart went out to them. Many years later, I found out that one of my friends, whose daddy was a fraternity brother with my dad, Scott Robertson of Lubbock, was doing mission work in Guatemala. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to find out more about this. And so I started emailing with Scott. I got on his email chain, and he was asking for helpers to come down to Guatemala. And I thought, well, this would be great for my son, who was in college at the time and is bilingual. And so Dean said he would round up some friends, and they were going to go down and do some roofing and do some chores like that. And I thought, this is great. Well, all his friends flaked out. And so I thought, okay, I'll go with Dean and Scott. And it was just the 3 of us, and we started working in this little village. And it turned out, I was fully expecting to get on a ladder and swing a hammer, and I found out what they really needed from me was translations. And so I've been going ever since. It's been about 12 years ago, I think, that I first went down there. That's about right. And been going ever since, rounded up a group of other friends from my church, and it's kind of expanded quite a bit.
So what church?
I go to First Presbyterian in Kerrville.
And then do you guys go to the same geographic area each year, to the same village? How do you, tell us a little bit about that?
All right, yes. Scott had, through a convoluted turn of events, had met what they call the president of a very small village called Guayavales. It's in the Santa Rosa district, which is not what I call the glamorous part of Guatemala. Nobody goes there sightseeing. It's just not that part of Guatemala where there's anything very distinctive. It's sort of close to the border of El Salvador and close to the Pacific Ocean. And he met this fellow, Octaviano Santos, and Octaviano said, look, this is our situation. We've been living on the side of this mountain. We are Guatemalan citizens. We pay our taxes, and we have no evidence of help from the government. No paved roads, no electricity, no running water, just, no health services. Occasionally a nurse would come up the mountain, maybe, let's say 7 or 8 times a year, about once a month unless it rains, and would do just brief checkups on people, but it wasn't nearly meeting the needs of the locals. And he said, we just need some help, and we want to educate our kids and pull ourselves out of poverty. and they're also they have a lot of what they call food insecurity, meaning that if the crops are good that year, they have a lot of corn and they can eat that and whatever little vegetables or fruits that they can grow in their, I want to say yards, but they're not really yards. They have like flower pots all around their house that are their gardens. And without running water, it's kind of hard to keep those things flourishing. And in a good year, they can sell the excess corn. But in a bad year, like this past year, there were a lot of near hurricanes. The hurricanes came by close enough that they had torrential rains and their crops were very scant. And so they kind of are struggling to eat this year.
So has your role continued to be as a translator, or have you really done just a variety of things?
Oh, no, I mostly just translate. When we go, we rent small four-wheel drive pickup trucks so we can get up and down the mountain. But almost always I'm just translating and coordinating like meals for the volunteers and making sure that people know where they're going and what they're supposed to do. When we get there, we always have a big group of local people working with us and really probably doing the bulk of the work, even though we're working right alongside of them. We've taken up to I guess 16 people. 12 is about the most we take. I want to point out that this effort isn't just my church. We have, friends of friends, and Scott is a Methodist, and he goes to Aldersgate Methodist Church in Lubbock, and some of our other friends come from different denominations. We have a Catholic friend that's been coming every year from Nashville, nurse practitioner, I think goes to a Bible church in Colorado Springs, and so we have a real faithful group of people from all denominations.
So you mentioned healthcare,
yes.
And do you guys try to provide some minimum level, either medical assistance or routine healthcare maintenance, or sort of the things that we take for granted here in the United States?
Oh, yes. One year we went down and did eye tests, just screenings, and took the people that seemed to have the worst vision or the highest need, and carried them in our little four-wheel drive pickup trucks down to the nearest city, Chiquimulía, and where there's an optometrist, and he outfitted all of them with glasses, and some of them just needed reading glasses, and that was fine too, but we did that one year. We always, over the past 4 years, I believe, we've taken our nurse practitioner friend, and then we've recently also adopted a medical doctor who was trained in Cuba and is now a pastor at a Hispanic Spanish language church in Lubbock. And last year we trained about 30 people in first aid, CPR, and maternity assistance. We did that over a 3-day period. And the ones that finished, the first 2 days of first aid and CPR received an EMT kit that we got through a grant from the Methodist Church Foundation. And then we did 3 half-days of medical consultations with people. We try to bring them... Oh, by the way, these people that came to these classes were from like 23 surrounding villages. So it's not just Guayavales, but it's other villages like Guayavales. Anyhow, we're helping to put a girl through nursing school by paying her tuition and travel fees because she has to commute. And she has pledged to serve her village when she finishes. And we've arranged there was a boy born deaf who Scott found some, I think, Cuban doctors that did a mission offshore from Guatemala, and we arranged for him to go and get this operation to restore his hearing, which was pretty amazing. And now he's a young adult, and he still talks funny, but he can hear, and it's the most amazing thing. We always talk to the sort of most highly trained medical person in each village and find out their highest needs, and we go and buy from a local pharmacy all of the medicines that they need. And it's mostly first aid. I mean, they're not trained medical professionals, as they're not as highly trained as a nurse, but they know all about first aid. And particularly during the harvest season, they need that first aid stuff. There are a lot of cuts and mainly bad cut injuries from swinging that machete and slipping.
You mentioned maternity services. Would the health care also include for small children or sort of regular checks for children as well?
Yeah, we do. We do our best to check kids. We noticed last time from all the children that we saw that they have really poor oral hygiene. One of my friends from Kerrville, Chris Vandenberg, brings a big old suitcase full of toothpaste and toothbrushes, and those are in great demand. And hoping to find a dentist for our next trip back this coming January that'll go with us and do that job.
Scott gave a presentation, and that's where I learned about the work you all are doing, and he showed several pictures of something as basic as building a wall.
Yes.
For a village.
Yes.
And what I really want the audience to understand is you guys are providing some very, very basic things.
Yes.
Toothbrushes and toothpaste may be as great as an example, but could you tell us a little bit about the wall? Because what struck me so much about that was the collaboration of everyone involved.
Yes, that was quite remarkable. We needed to put a retaining wall behind the school in Guatemala. The whole village is on a really steep slope. You don't go anywhere without getting your stair climbing steps in. But this wall was 142 feet long, and we started by trenching, and we bought can't even remember how many tons of cement, gravel, sand, and rebar, and other reinforcing steel rods, and we dug this trench, and every single rock, also rocks, big rocks the size of your head or bigger, the size of a watermelon, that the villagers carried by hand from the bottom of the hill to the top, which is I can't imagine quite how far it is, because, just driving in the truck, you feel like you've been beat up going up that road because it's really rough. But they brought the rocks, and then we hauled all of the things that we had to purchase, the sand, cement, and gravel, and rebar. And so we built this trench and then poured the cement, made sure it was level, poured the cement with the rebar on top of that, and then started piling the stones and the cement and the gravel and all that in between. They don't sell Saccrete, so you have to mix the cement and the sand yourself to make concrete. And it was quite the process. From loading these materials into the back of the truck was done by hand in the village of Chiquimulia with, two guys with shovels that are employees of the lumberyard where we bought the stuff. And we carried this up, a square meter of material at a time, and maybe 10 bags of cement was all that your truck would hold, and bounce to the top of the hill, and then they'd offload that material at the top of the hill till they were ready to use it, and then they would mix the cement or carry the gravel in little feed sacks, or in, if it was a rock, you'd carry it in your hands. And little children and old men and everybody in between was hauling this stuff down the hill to where the wall was becoming.
You mentioned that you're paying for a woman to get a nursing education, and you've also, or Scott also talked about the educational component of what you're doing, that you're really trying to give the children, particularly, education. You mentioned the school. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
There is a government school in Guatemala. It's a little 2-room thing. They have 2 teachers. But because of the bad road conditions, often the teachers don't make it to the school. If there's the slightest bit of rain, it's just too risky to try and pass that road in a vehicle. Well, if you walked, it's a 5-hour walk. That's a lot to ask anybody to do. So the teachers often don't come. And so we built with Habitat for Humanity Guatemala, and using funds that were given through our different churches, we built a little house there right next to the school for the teachers to live in. And a year later, they weren't living there yet. So we're not sure if that was a failed experiment. We thought they'd be jumping at the chance, to have this nice house, because it really is the nicest house in town. And most houses are not made of cinder block, and this one is, and it has porcelain toilets and sinks, and which is really something for a town with no running water. But they make it work. Anyway, but we have that. We funded a program called Aula Mágica, the magical classroom, in 3 different villages in our immediate area. It's like Head Start, where you get these pre-K age children, 4 and 5-year-old kids come down and they learn things like the colors and the alphabet and how to write their names and how to, organize and sort and communicate. And this Aula Mágica was started by an American man, and it's all over the place. It's not just in Guatemala, but it's a terrific program. They get local high school graduates to teach the class so that they don't have to travel, and that they're already educated to an extent enough, and they get paid for it. And they go a half a day. They get nutritional snacks, which also increases their ability to learn. And they meet like 10 months out of the year with those little kids. So we fund those. And then we also fund 5 kids to their high school tuition. And we've done that now too. This is our 2nd year. And those kids are making good grades. We keep up with them. They're doing very well.
You mentioned a couple of times either grants or other funding that you've been able to get, and it really strikes me that you leverage as much as possible, not simply the people that go, but the organizations that would support you. Would that also be a fair assessment?
That is a goal we have. And Scott is the president of our organization called Let Hope Begin Here, Guatemala. And he's always looking for helpers. He casts a broad, wide net and dreams big, which is fantastic. And he's anyway, I don't want to talk about stuff that hasn't happened, but he's always asking, and he's always kind of stirring the pot, and could we do this? Could we do that? And so, yes, we try to. And another friend of mine that's on the board is Mary Ellen Summerlin, and she said, there's a whole lot of people that would love to go and be a help, but they don't speak Spanish, or they don't know anything about, engineering or healthcare, and they don't have the physical strength to swing that axe, to dig the hole, to put the trench, for whatever. And she says they want to do their part, and so they're happy to donate. So we just raise funds from everybody.
Jen, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, could you tell us again, if someone wanted more information, where would be the best place for them to go? Oh,
I think the best thing to do would be to email me, Jane at hohcamp.com.
Is there a website that Scott has, or other places such as that?
There is a website, and it's really inadequate. And when I go there, it says unsafe. It's not a secure website. We have to get that fixed. But it's lethopebeginhere.org.
Well, Jane, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me, and at some point I want to visit with you about running the camp.
That's my other passion. Thank you, Tom.
This is Tom Fox. I live in the Texas Hill Country. On Friday, July 4th, Kirk County saw the worst flooding it has ever seen. At this point, as I'm recording this podcast, nearly 70 people have been found dead, and there are many, many more people still missing. I'm going to ask you to please consider a donation to the Hill Country Flood Relief Fund. I've listed it in the show notes. I know it's a little bit unusual to make this request, but I can't tell you the tragedy that has unfolded in my home county over the 4th of July weekend. Thank you for your consideration. And now, on to the Daily Compliance News.